Welcome back to Ready Nerd Go. My name's Alex. His name's Anko.
Hello, hello.
And today we are talking about Anko's favorite tabletop RPG systems. If you weren't aware, if this is your first time listening to us, we are Graphic Policy's tabletop RPG board game, tabletop RPG more than board game show where we try to talk about getting into tabletop RPGs, how to go about creating characters, that sort of thing that we've touched on over the last 5 episodes. As we said, this episode, because I know almost nothing about RPG games beyond the three that Anko has made me play, I have no real context for the differences between them. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Yeah, so, I mean, first off, the biggest difference that comes up in what's your favorite RPG is that there's very much the RPGs that you get and want to play, and the RPGs that you've actually managed to play. Once you've started actually delving into the hobby, especially if you're a GM, you tend to accumulate a lot of them, especially since most of them have PDF versions now, so you can just have a absolute digital hoard without worrying about space requirements.
So what you're saying is that sometimes you may collect RPG systems and not actually play them, not unlike me collecting comics and not actually reading half of them.
Oh, 100%. If you look at even just my physical collection of RPGs, I've played a quarter of them, I would say, and that's not for lack of trying. It's one of the fun things about having a collaborative game that requires other people to really get into, except if you're playing solo stuff. But it's
Yeah.
difficult to actually get in them, especially because, you know, speaking of favorites, everybody has different things that they want to play. And so, for example, if we're talking about something like Mouse Guard, one that I've had the second edition box for sitting on my shelf for a few years now, I really want to play it. It seems like a really interesting system. Getting a group together for it can be rather difficult because it plays very differently from any of the stuff we play at our game shop.
So when you say the differences, I've always thought that, like, because I think that when I started playing, it was really with Pathfinder second edition,
Yes.
and then we started playing the Alien Colonial Marines, and I kept trying to roll for initiative with a D20 in Alien, and you don't need that. And it
No.
has taken me numerous sessions to realize I don't need to use my D20.
Yeah, that's
And
something that, probably should have been explained clearer to you, but
I think it was explained. It's just I used a D20 at some point, and I can't remember what I used it for. So it just in my mind, oh, I just use this.
yeah.
It
Oh yeah,
it
yeah.
didn't occur to me that it's a so when I'm going to roughly explain it, and then you can correct me because we both know I'm not going to do this well,
Well, there's the fun.
right? When you're playing Pathfinder, and I assume to a certain extent D&D,
Mm,
you will roll for initiative with a D20, and the higher the number, the more likely you are to go first or succeed, depending on what you're trying to do. It
yeah.
can lead to some hilarious moments where some idiot somehow gets three high numbers in a row, and the final boss that we were fighting goes down remarkably quickly because the fucking murder hobo goblin is on fire. Whereas in Alien, it's a case of you roll a set number of d6s plus more depending on stress level, which I know you'll get to in a second,
Yep.
and it's a binary case of, did you roll a 6? Yes, you succeeded. Did you roll a 1? Yes, well then that's a either a critical failure or not, depending on which dice you rolled it on.
Yes, yeah. It's to elaborate on that one a little.
I
With
say,
the
please do.
yeah, with the aliens, it's a D6 pool system. So you roll a whole bunch of different D6. It's usually better to have two different colors of them because you have your normal die, which are your character's abilities, and then you have the stress die, which is stuff that builds up as the game progresses. It's a really neat system. I'd love to drag and drop it into some of the other ones that I play. But how it works is that as Alex alluded to, when you roll a 6, that's a success. The more sixes you have, you can either deal more damage or do cool tricks or like, embellish extra stuff in the game depending on the number of d6s you roll. But the downside of that is with the stress die, if you roll a 1 on any of the stress die, your character essentially has a bit of a mental break. And then depending on how much stress they've accumulated, it could be anything from, dropping your gun, running in fear. I think like the worst result is literally you just drop dead from stress. Like it's
I still haven't had that happen yet.
although we've been that's one of the fun things about just the way that we play, where we all just kind of go, ooh, this system looks fun, and then learn it as we go, is that we
Yep.
frequently discover little rules that are like, oh wait, we haven't been doing this. Perfect example is in the Marines one. We discovered only like 7 sessions in, I think, that if you roll 10 or higher on your stress check, then the action that you were attempting fails no matter what. We
Didn't
did
know that.
not know that. We were just having it succeed as long as there was sixes, and then the stress effect happens afterwards, which made stress as a mechanic a lot less scary, honestly, because building up higher numbers meant, yeah, your character might scream a bit, but he's more effective. But with that 10 over rules, like, oh, if it accumulates too much, he's functionally incapable of working, and that's one of the favorite things. Like, I'm not a huge fan of the Aliens game, just because it's not really my thing. Like, it's the concept is all right. I'm not a big mega fan of the Alien franchise or anything, so it's just kind of okay, sure. But the way the dice in that game reinforce the fiction is really cool, because those stress die really give you that feel of, the Alien movie, where when you start off, everybody's just relaxed and moving around, and then as the tension mounts, your stress builds up, and people both start being wildly competent and wildly incompetent, and it
It,
measures out that feel really well.
yeah, honestly, I think we're in the same boat when it comes to the nature of the Alien game. It's not that I don't I'm enjoying the game. I just, much to I'm sure some of the guys' chagrin, couldn't give two shits about the Alien universe itself.
Yeah, no, there's
I,
definitely been some long-winded diatribes on details
yeah,
that I honestly don't care about.
and and the amount of times they're going off, I'm like, at what point is it appropriate for me to say, I don't care, I just asked if I could go through a door?
Yeah, that is one of the downsides of playing a game in an established fiction, is that you have, especially if you have people who are really large fans of it, because if you're all really big fans of it, great, you can dig right into the nitty-gritty details of whatever fictional world you're playing in. But if you have some people that don't really care about the world and are just there to, play the game and enjoy the story at the table, it can bog you down a bit.
So I'm actually going to delve into that a bit more, playing the game in the established fiction, because I know that you've played Cthulhu,
Yep.
you've played Lord of the Rings, Witcher, Alien, case in point. When it comes to those settings, I'm going to go out on a limb and assume that you have some that are more preferable to you than others. How
Oh
much
yeah.
does how much does the system you're playing in influence the game itself? Because you said that, well, we both said we don't really care about the alien setting, but the system is pretty cool. So,
Well, it's it's something that's come up in the conversation about RPGs for a while. Is you constantly, you would, not so much anymore, but for a while you would constantly hear the maxim of, system doesn't matter. It's all about, how you interact with other people at the table and like how people work together, which is true to an extent, but the system definitely influences how you play. Like if we were playing Aliens with the Pathfinder rule set, we would behave very differently towards how we go towards these encounters, because in Pathfinder you don't need to worry about, the stress die causing you to freak out and do something that you didn't want to do, and your characters are a lot more durable, and
mm,
it's
well,
just,
yeah, because I I lost a health point which now leaves me with 2 health points,
Yeah,
right?
and like
So I think
I
that's hilarious,
yeah,
but
I I took I took a single, not even that bad shot in Aliens and had a broken arm for the rest of the adventure. In Pathfinder, I can take in heck I played a Pathfinder 2 game yesterday where my character got, a giant chunk bitten out of his shoulder by a zombie in a fight, lost like 3/4 of his hit points, and then after the fight, it was like, all right, first aid check, back to full, continue on. It's a
yeah,
very different feel.
it, I find that Pathfinder, and I'm sure to the similar extent, D&D, it's more about making you feel like a badass adventurer as opposed to playing in the setting itself. I've
Yeah.
always felt that and I'm using these two interchangeably because this is just what I understand. So correct me when I go wrong. But with Pathfinder and D&D, it's a I don't want to say a generic fantasy setting, but it seems to be a generic fantasy setting for the most part.
Well, we could do an entire podcast just on the history of D&D and Pathfinder. But to quick sum up, the major reason for us, especially, that D&D feels like generic fantasy is because D&D, for most of North American culture, kind of established the baseline of what generic fantasy was past Tolkien.
Mm.
Because like, all of, like, because everybody says, oh, D&D, it's just like Lord of the Rings, when if you actually sit them down and look at them next to each other, they're very different fantasies.
Oh,
Like,
very much so. It in theory, you're like, oh, it's basically the same. Yeah, yeah. It's like saying it's basically the same, like how football are the same. Sorry, how American football and real football are the same.
that's exactly the example I was going to use. But yeah, no, because yeah, oh, they both have like elves and orcs and dwarves and humans and hobbits. Which, fun fact, in very early D&D, they were called hobbits, but they had to change the name to halflings to avoid, the
I did
Tolkien
wonder
estate going
about
after
that.
them.
Yeah, I did wonder about that because they're basic halflings are basically the Hobbit, but
Yeah. Oh,
you
100%.
yeah, it's just a name change.
Yeah. And that's also why, you have the Balor instead of the Balrog, and a lot of things in D&D are, I mean, actually, most of, especially early D&D, was the creators going, oh, hey, here's this random thing that I like or thing that I have. I'm going to put it into the game world, and that's why the early D&D was significantly more gonzo. Because, like, do you know? Actually, great example. Do you know what the rust monster is?
No.
It's this like weird like insectoid thing that has like these long feelers on its face that like rusts metal and stuff whenever it touches it. Terrifying for like heavy armored characters when you run into them. That thing came about because way back in early D&D, somebody found, I think it was like I want to say it was like a cereal box toy or something, of this like weird little monster with these long feelers on its face, and like, hey, I'm going to use this at the table, and it's going to be this, and they just made up what the monster was based entirely on this tiny little toy that they just happened to have, and that's a lot
That's
of
actually kind of
D&D comes from
fantastic.
things like that. Yeah, like
It, well, I remember one of my first exposures to D&D beyond the 4 or 5 sessions I played before. I don't know if you heard that, but Walter's deciding to try and get in on the show.
Walter is his cat, to be clear.
Yes, he is. He also has a very little voice. So anyway, one of my first exposures to it was, as I'm sure with a lot of people, in Stranger Things, and
Hmm.
how they would use the Demogorgon to name the villain or the monster in the show. It's like, well, hey, it looks like a Demogorgon, and then they would almost base the villain off the um, the D&D monster. So it's all, to me that was almost that in reverse.
Yeah, Stranger Things is actually a really interesting case study there, because you will hear arguments back and forth as to whether, the explosion in D&D's the modern explosion in D&D's popularity was because of Stranger Things, or whether Stranger Things used it because of its exploding popularity. I mean, it's probably one feeds into the other, but
I I would think it it was probably a combination of Stranger Things, I don't think you can discount that. Like, there are definitely people who you see walking around with, or who understand what a roll 20 or roll for initiative is now.
Yeah.
Like, there are memes that people understand even if they've never played the game. Whereas I think, funnily enough, COVID probably had as much to do with it as anything else, because all of a sudden you couldn't do anything, right?
Hmm.
Beyond, well, maybe I'll sit at home and play a game online. So I wonder how much COVID, Stranger Things, and then just in general, people are being more accepting of nerdish hobbies.
Yeah, it's kind of D&D has always been the 800-pound gorilla in the room of tabletop RPGs, but it's definitely exploded in popularity in the last what, like, oh man, decade? I'm suddenly feeling very old.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Anyway, now that
it's been pretty good because it
yeah,
raises up other systems, and it makes, because other people, people who before would never have tried D&D or tabletop RPGs at all are suddenly more interested in it. Like, I don't think before like Stranger Things and Critical Role and all that stuff caused D&D's popularity to become so much more widely known, I don't think I ever could have gotten my family to actually sit down and play a tabletop RPG, but I got all my siblings involved and they actually enjoyed it.
now here's another question, cycling us back to what the original question was before we both went on a Stranger Things and D&D tangent, which is how that's going to be presented in the show notes, because I don't actually know how else to describe it. When it comes to playing RPGs with your family,
Mm.
people like myself, etc., how do you decide what system to introduce them to? Do you go, well, we're going to try Pathfinder or D&D because that's the most standard, quote unquote?
It tends to boil down into one of two camps. Generally, if they're approaching me because they're interested in playing, it's because they want to play D&D, because the D&D is the only one they've heard about. They may have already bought some of the books out of curiosity. Okay, sure. It's not, the modern iteration isn't my favorite system. It's not a bad system by any stretch, just doesn't really scratch the itch for me. But
There's nothing wrong
like,
with that either.
exactly. But like for my brother's kids, I I've run some games for them in one or two different systems, but primarily they're collecting. They're getting the D&D books. They're creating their own like monsters and characters and all that. They're really into it. So I'm not going to tell them, okay, you want to play this, but I'm going to make you play this. Like, no, they want to play D&D. We're going to start with D&D because that's what they're interested in. On the flip side, if it's coming from the perspective of, they've seen me rolling these funny little math rocks and they're curious, then I have a completely different approach to it. Because like generally what I'll do is try to figure out like what interests them. Like if they hate fantasy, I'm not going to start with something like D&D. I'm going to start with something that can handle like a modern game or a sci-fi game or something like that. Something that, actually appeals to their interests. Although there's definitely been cases where people have gone, oh, I wouldn't like that at all. And they try it and they're over the moon about it. But generally speaking, I try to go for something that is relatively light on rules, just because nobody really wants to be given homework to play a game. It's a lot easier if I can just say, hey, we're gonna play, a fantasy game. Think kind of like Lord of the Rings. What type of character do you want to play? Not. Don't look at the mechanics. Don't need to look at the books or anything. Just
What
tell me
kind
the
of
type of
character do you
character
want to
you
play?
want to play. Well, if you really want to get into the character creation, I'll help you through the character creation. Otherwise, I will make something for you that fits what you want to do, and then at the table, you don't even need to look at your character sheet if you don't want to for the first session or two. Just tell me what you want to do, and I will translate that into the rules for you.
Which I think is a great way to get new players interested, because you're not having them rely on knowing everything.
Yeah.
It makes me think of my wife. So she wouldn't, like, she enjoys games, but anything that's too overwhelming, I think, in part because of the nature of her ADHD, you
Hmm.
have maybe a 3-minute window to explain something to her before she say, yeah, I'm not getting this. and then she'll drift off, which is why games like Ticket to Ride are great for her versus D&D.
Yeah,
So,
and I definitely wouldn't try to start her on something like Fantasy Craft, which is old D&D spin-off that is very crunchy, like a lot of finicky little rules and all that stuff. Would not try to start her on something like that. I would start her on something like maybe, I don't know, Savage Worlds, which has a very simple and easy to understand mechanic behind it, past, understanding the sizes of dice, because that's something that when you, especially when you're a RPG player or even a board game player, but mostly with an RPG, like you kind of internalize a lot of the default rules of the hobby that you don't think about, which
mhm.
are like, hey, what is a D20? What is a D12? Like those basic things that we take for granted. Somebody who's coming into the game, like if when you first started playing, when he's like, hey, roll a D20. Which one's a D20? Oh, it's this one,
It
because
one
you
of
don't
one of
have
my
that.
favorite interactions was like, "Oh, roll the d12. Which one's a d12? The one with 12 on it." And in my mind, I'm like, "All right, so there's two of them with 12 on it. That doesn't help as much as you think it does." Now, it did get a good laugh at the table because it's like, how long does it take to get a tattoo? How long's a piece of string? It really depends. But
Exactly.
in that moment, I was like, very valid answer. But my d20 has a 12 on it as well. So
Exactly. And that's not even getting into the weirder systems like Dungeon Crawl Classics has what is it, D16 and D32 and some other weird ones in there, if memory serves. I haven't actually played it yet.
I
Somebody's going to correct me
remember
in the comments.
now. Here's something that I wanted to ask you purely because it came up. We were playing a
Hmm.
game the other day, and someone said, "Oh, roll a d100 or
Ooh,
something." And
yeah. So
what the?
there's that's actually a really fun one, because that because dice are just ways to stimulate probability, right? Like they're
Hmm.
just ways to randomize within a certain bounds. D100, there's a lot of games that are like percentile systems. Like Call of Cthulhu is a percentile system. All you use is two 10-sided dice, one that represents the ones column, one that represents the tens column. And that's actually why you'll see a lot of the D10s, they'll actually have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0 on one side, and 0, 0, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90 on the other one, because they're meant to represent a percentile spread.
Which it makes sense when you break it down, but when someone says, "Oh, roll a d100," I'm like, "Huh? I don't have one of those. How'd you get one of those?"
Now, fun fact, they actually do make D100s. They look like an oversized golf ball, and they're absolutely terrible to roll with, because it's a sphere with a whole bunch of tiny flat surfaces on it to
Your
give you the 100 sides. So trying to you roll it, it rolls forever, and then you're trying to read which one of the like
tiny
10
little
close
numbers
to
is
the
on
top
top.
are the ones you're looking for.
I feel like it would be a terrible idea to have a d100 versus two
It's
d10s.
it is 100% for novelty. They made it because they could, not because it actually provided any benefit.
Yep, that makes complete sense to me.
And oh, we could do a whole episode on novelty dice. But gonna stick with favorite RPGs here and actually vaguely try to stay on topic.
So I think for people who want to peek behind the curtain, the entire notes for this show going into it was favorite RPG systems, which means that if you're expecting us to have a more structured show like we have done over the past 5 episodes, it probably isn't happening.
No.
That being said, we are trying to stay more or less on topic as it comes up, but it's very much more of an organic. Any show notes you see are because I'm just taking notes as Anko's talking.
Yep. So rolling back around to try to get to topic back on hand. If we're looking at my favorites specifically, I tend to break them down by, like, what is my favorite to play in this particular genre? What is my favorite to play, like, because of the mechanical, specifically because of the mechanical quirks it have, and which ones I just really like reading on my shelf, even though the odds of me ever getting to play them are slim to none. I really want to play them at some point.
How many books do you have that you buy just to read that you end up using for inspiration in the other games?
Well, See, the thing
That's
is,
a loaded question. I realize that.
when I buy them, I'm telling myself that I'm going to get to play with them. Like I never buy an RPG specifically to have it sit on the shelf to be read, and that's it. Every single one I buy is like, oh man, I would love to play it at some point. I'll pick it up, and then eventually the time will come, and then I'll be ready to play it. But yeah, no, if we're looking, I mean, heck, at my bookshelf right now, and I've pared down my books a fair bit over the years, just because they're bloody heavy, and when you're moving as much as I used to be, you don't want to keep packing and unpacking them.
I understand the sentiment or the statement there. I've moved far less than most people would expect. Um, so I can only imagine having to move RPG books because just restocking them on the shelf when you take the box from one part of the store to the other, you're like, this has got to be at least 20 to 30 pounds worth of hardcover books that you're lifting, which isn't a big deal when you're going 30 feet in a store. But when you're got significantly more than a box worth of books, and then you're like, oh,
Oh.
I've got to go into and out of the van. Maybe I don't have a van. Who knows?
Yeah, no, it reminds me of I think it was the webcomic Three Panel Soul. It had a comic a strip about that where they're packing up and lugging their books, and they're like, yeah, knowledge is power. Power is equivalent to mass. E.g., these books are fucking heavy because
Touche.
it's just
Touche.
because oh man, especially 'cause, like some of them, like some RPG books are a dozen pages. They're pretty much a little zine with the bare minimum rules that you need to play. Like Everyone is John, I think fits on a single page, which is I'll get back to that one in a second. It's a really interesting one. But then you get the absolute door stoppers, like the Lancer book. That's like I've had actual textbook, like college textbooks that are smaller than that thing. Those they the weight of those adds up really quickly.
When I actually wanted to ask you about this, now that you bring it up, and I realize I have a question about it.
Hmm.
I've seen when people are playing with the Alien game, for example, with it, there's something that comes up. Oh, hey, is that in this book, or this book? Why in the name of time would you have three different books to play one game? I
Whoa.
I under now I understand if you have a Dungeon Master's book and a
Mm,
player handbook, because maybe you want to keep the story spoilers separately, because I'm sure that there are times where, as the GM, you don't necessarily want the players to understand what's coming. You want them to be able to react in time. And
yeah.
some players are good at doing that even if they know what the module is going to be.
So
Not everyone.
there's a few different thought lines I can take this response in, and I kind of want to touch on all of them.
Go for it.
The first and foremost one is that it's just like any video game that you buy the base product and then they come out with add-ons for that product, and you pick up those add-ons because either you really enjoy the base product or you want to support the developer. And then but unlike a video game where it all just seamlessly integrates in, you can't buy a new book and just fuse it into your old book. You just have the add-on book of content sitting next to the original book.
That is fair. So, what's the difference between an add-on book versus something that's like, oh, this is the second edition, it has more stuff in it?
Okay, so generally speaking, how that breaks down is you in every system will have its core book or core books. Generally, the simpler the system is to run, the more likely it'll only be in one book, while the larger, more complex systems tend to have multiple books, because like D&D is a great example where it has the player handbook, which is has all of the stuff that the players need to play. That's the only one they need to pick up. Then there's the Dungeon Master's Guide, which is yeah, depending on the edition, can be full of useful advice. Other times it's not as great, but like that's one that's really helpful for the DM to pick up, but not strictly necessary, because it mostly is informing the GM. Okay, hey, here's how you can handle these situations. Here's how you can like design these types of adventures. Here's some of the expanded rules that the players don't really need to know about. so on and so forth. And then you have the monster manual, which is just a literal book of monsters. It's just a giant book of stat blocks for the GM to grab and incorporate into whatever adventure they have, so they don't need to come up with, 4 different types of goblins to have in their adventure. They can open up the monster manual to goblin and go, okay, so there's these different entries here. I can just grab them and use them.
It's very much not a cheat code, but an ease of use guide.
Yeah, and it's also like
in that case.
if D&D was all one book, can you imagine how much of a nightmare that one book would be to actually use at the table?
I feel like it would be close to 2,000 pages, would it not?
I'm not sure what the modern D&D books are page count wise, but yeah, no, it would definitely feel like it.
And especially considering that these aren't small books; these are like 11 by 15 inches, and
then,
they're a couple of inches thick per edition, from what I can see. So you'd be looking at close to £30 worth of book, I'm sure. That might be an exaggeration, but I'm sure it will feel like that if you're walking somewhere.
I mean, that is definitely on the exaggeration side, but also you definitely feel it, especially back in the D&D 3.5 era where they were coming out with new add-on books like multiple a year. So if you wanted to make a character towards the end of 3.5, you would be pulling options from easily 5-10 different books.
When it comes to using multiple books to create a character, how can you ensure that, hey, I got these 4 things from book A, B, C, and F? If people don't have book F, like, oh, we don't believe you. It's true, I just left the book at home.
So,
I realize that there's a lot of just general player integrity at that point.
Yeah, well, yeah. There's one of I'll always remember. I can't remember what was the name of the game. Very very simple board game. Like it was a very simple card game that had that relied on you being honest with the other players about what cards you had in your hand. Because if they said, hey, do you have this, you could just say no or yes. They have no way of actually verifying that. And there was a blurb in the rules about hey, how do I make sure that X person isn't cheating when they're playing? And the response was just don't play with cheaters. Like there's only so much you can do. Eventually, at some point, you just need to rely on the other people to not lie to you.
The ironic thing is there are games specifically built off that where you're supposed to cheat your way through it.
Yep. But to kind of get back to what you were saying there on how multiple splat books work, generally what will happen is it'll be one of 2 methods. Either it's a free-for-all if you have the book, as long as you can show the GM, hey, this is what I'm getting from, you're good, sure. There's ones where I've seen groups go where the GM says, if I don't own the book, you can't use it.
Ironically, that seems surprisingly fair.
Yeah, and then the one that I prefer to use, although it does cause some people to get into a bit of a conniption, which honestly I tend to use a fairly good metric on whether or not I want them to play or not. What I'll go with a lot of times, especially when I'm teaching new players, is I'll say, hey, we're playing this system. These are the books that I'm allowing you to choose stuff from. We're planning a Shadow the Demon Lord game at Comic Hunter for when when our GM just doesn't want to play, and fair, that happens. So I'm planning this Shadow the Demon Lord game as a fallback for when he's not around. And Shadow the Demon Lord, it's one of my it is in my one of my favorites list. So I'm gonna pull into that in a second. But the way he did, because it's one person who owns and develops 90% of it. He'll occasionally have freelancers come in, but for the most part, the guy who writes it, Rob Schwab, is just, I'm probably not saying his name right, is just a machine when it comes to producing content. He has, I think, 3 of the books that he's written are available in physical form, and all of the others are PDFs. And generally how he does things, and I really like it, is that he'll release a PDF that's only 5 pages, but it'll be covering a very specific thing. Like, he'll have 5 pages of different types of dragons, or 5 pages of different types of oozes, or like, just little things to expand your game on. So as the GM, if I'm going, hey, I want to get more dragon stat box, I don't need to buy a giant monster manual with a whole bunch of things I don't want. I can get this one PDF. It's going to cost me like $4.
That makes sense. So I don't know if my audio has changed drastically in the last few minutes, but fun anecdote is my headset died midway through what we were talking about. So I had to grab a different one, which thankfully I just happened to have sitting next to me, because I got a warning earlier that your headset's dying. I'm like, better go get a backup just in case. So I had thought that it was charging overnight, but I guess it doesn't work if the laptop it's connected to isn't open. Who knew?
So how much of that did you miss then?
Everything between having a connection and Rob Schwab.
Okay, condensed version, so the people listening at home don't need to hear all of that again.
I'm not cutting any of that out, because I think it's hilarious. It's a real life thing. It's one of those moments in the show where we just happen to have a real life thing, and I think it's funny. So that's not getting cut out.
Nope. All right, so Too Long Didn't Read version. He released the main core book that's available physically. He releases, like every Monday, he releases a small PDF that's a couple of pages long, covers a very narrow slice of things. So if the players or the GM wants to expand on one narrow thing, they only need to spend like $3 on a PDF, as opposed to like the $60 for a physical book that can come up, which is great if you want specific things. But then you get to the point that I'm at, where I have, I think, like 100 PDFs for this one system.
At which point, I'm sure it's a nightmare to try and track down where each PDF, or what is in each PDF, if it's not a condensed version that you can control and find through.
Yeah, thankfully the fan community has been, including myself in that one, has been very good at keeping like Google Doc spreadsheets that are just, okay, are you looking for this? It's in this book on this page, which is just necessary when you get to that large of stuff. Saves you a lot of time.
Ironically enough, I find that the nature of RPGs, because it's more collaborative, I find that, from what I understand about the fan communities, for the most part, people are very supportive and collaborative of, like you said, hey, we've got all this information but no centralized repository. Let's all come together and have a build a fan-made index or glossary or that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, it's player side tools being something that fans create, and GM side tools has been something that's been going on for pretty much as long as the internet has brought people together to collaborate on it, and before then too. But like, pretty much every digital character sheet and like digital character builder for almost every single RPG I can think of has been something that's been created by the fans, because they went, hey, I can make a character sheet, like I can make a character builder for this system, and I like it enough that it's something I want to do. I'm gonna, make it, make sure that especially with the smaller ones, make sure the creators, hey, I'm good with this, and here you go. Like the CompCon that we use for Lancer, which controls make character creation and playing significantly easier. That's technically a fan product. Like it's been endorsed and supported by the creators of the system, but they don't actually have anything to do with it. That's I think it's literally one guy managing and upgrading and building that. And there's a whole bunch of additional character options and stuff for that system that fans have made, that they've even put together the files necessary that you can upload their fan creations into CompCon, so you have all of that integration for the fan-made content as well.
How rare is it that, I say the developers because I'm used to video games, but the game creators will adopt fan-made content into their systems or into their games?
Ooh, that you get into some really sketchy areas with I can't remember whether it's copyright or trademark, but it's generally creators tend to try not to listen to fan ideas because there's always the concern about a fan going, hey, that's my idea that you stole and you owe me money for it and stuff
I
like
think
that.
that's the same across almost any industry, whether it
Yeah.
be comics, it's books, wrestling, to really diversify the pool of examples. No matter what you have, if a fan says, oh, hey, here's my idea, you should use it, and then something even remotely similar is in the work, there's a good chance it's like, well, I'm not doing that.
Yeah.
I'm
Now,
sure that's part of the reason, and I'm aware this could be a tangent, that's part of the reason that A Song of Ice and Fire hasn't been finished, or some of the other books that are waiting for a finale.
tangents in our podcast?
How strange. So, ironically enough, that is something that we'll touch on down the road eventually, is media ideas to inspirations to what we enjoy, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
It is something we plan on doing, so we're going to try and avoid that subject. However, in this example, it just happened to come up and make sense.
Now, so looping back into creators and fans, having said, they try to avoid ideas, it's also very true that, it's the hobby, especially once you get outside of the 800-pound gorilla of D&D, the hobby can be very collaborative outside of like the major players that like have big book releases and all of that kind of stuff. Like there's actually one game that I just finished that the Kickstarter for it just succeeded on, which people are going to hear this in like a month. This should be long done by then. But in this current moment, it just hit its funding goal. That creator, I think it's like a 2-person team. They run a Discord for the games that they've made, and they freely, talk with and interact with the people who are playing it for like play testing their stuff, for like, oh, this seems cool. What would you think of that? Oh yeah, no, that's a good idea. Going to incorporate it in because it's it's a very collaborative hobby, and that extends to making the games as well in a lot of cases. And most I'm professional. Part of me wants to put that in air quotes because it's the joke about it with pretty much any niche hobby of how do you make $1 million in RPGs? You start with 10 million. But
Fair, yep.
yeah. So most of these RPGs, like outside of once again like D&D, which is funded by Hasbro and has Hasbro money to throw at things, most of these games, including the very popular ones, are made and developed by a team of like 2 to 10 people.
Yeah, and I feel like it's a case of people will do their own illustrations, whatever, essentially create the game, and then hey, if people come up with ideas for mechanics, maybe we can incorporate that. But if you come up with story ideas, that's a bit more like you said.
That's for your table.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. But that's actually one of the biggest things with Kickstarters, especially for the people who understand what they're doing with making Kickstarters. It's like, hey, I have the rules of my game pretty much done at this point, but I'm just a dude working a 9-to-5 job. I don't have the money to professionally, make this look good and functionable for other people. I'm going to put up a Kickstarter to fund the print run and hiring artists to make art for the game, and hiring a layout designer for the book, because layout design is one of those things that started off very badly and it has iterated into its own entire skill set, is how to lay out a book.
The irony with layout design is that it's very much like a good letterer in a comic book.
Yeah.
If it's done well, you won't even notice it. But if it's done poorly, you're going to remember the guy's name.
Yeah.
There's only so many letterers that I actually remember the name of because they're really good. there's a lot more like, oh, is that person lettering? Yeah. It's very rare that I won't read a book because of a letterer, but
It really throws you. Yeah.
it can throw you off, yeah.
Not to name and shame here, because I don't want to be dragging niche creators who literally probably couldn't afford good layout designers. Because
And I'm not saying I could do any better with that either.
Yeah.
Like, to be clear.
But we have definitely played games, including at the game shop. We have definitely played games where it took us easily like 10 times longer to learn the system than it should have, because the book was so poorly laid out that we were constantly going, oh, wait, this rule says we need to do this. Why isn't it over here with the other rules where it would actually make sense? And wait, this place, how do we do this? It's nowhere in the, it's in this sidebar 100 pages from where you would expect it to be.
I remember one of the examples that I've seen, and ironically enough, it actually makes sense depending on how you approach the question. Someone was talking in the game shop about Lancer and a specific damage type, and he's like, where would you put him? Like, I put it under damage, but it was under a specific missile or whatever, so the damage aspect of it was a bit further down the chain of things to look into.
Yeah.
And when he explained, like, I can see how that would make sense to the person laying it out, just as I understand why it doesn't make sense to you.
Yeah, and that's something that you run into a lot with any form of development, where at some point you need to step back and let somebody with fresh eyes take a look at it, because you understand what you're looking at. It makes perfect sense to you. But somebody else is going to look at it and go, wait, how does any of this flow together? Well, you just need to know this, 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 and this.
Why isn't that there then?
I need to make sure you can actually understand this, 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 and this.
Yeah, exactly. So it can easily be a case of proofreading, but sometimes, like you said, it's getting someone like me in who has no idea what the hell is going on to have a look. Does this make sense to you as someone that doesn't understand things?
Yeah, and another major aspect of layout is I have definitely gone from on the fence to, yeah, I'm going to buy this book, entirely because of the presentation of it. A really good example of that is the Morkborg game and its myriad of spin-offs are not designed with, like, they're very simple games, but they're not really designed with ease of use as their primary focus, so much as they are just giving you like a visual smorgasbord to look at. Like, it's because they'll have a table, but instead of just a simple table, it'll be like surrounded by graphics in two different colors, offset with like that 3D hologram effect on it, so it's damn near illegible. But that's the style of what you're getting into, and that's why you bought this game, because it just looks so gorgeous that you can put up with everything being tilted around. And that's very easy to do poorly. Like, a lot of, I haven't looked at White Wolf games in a while, so I don't know how good they're about it now, but for a while there, it was a common complaint with the White Wolf line of games, like, Vampire, Werewolf, Mage, those, where you would have blocks, like entire pages, where the font choice and like color of font used means that you could literally not read parts of it, because it wasn't understandable, which is not good when it's how your character's abilities work.
I was about to say, I can almost see that making sense if it's designed to be hard to understand, but if it's a character ability, that doesn't make any sense at all.
Yeah, like like fiction blurbs or like aesthetic text and stuff. Yeah, mess with that as much as you want.
Yeah,
Morkborg is actually a great example for layout design in general, just because it toes that line of usability and sheer visual noise. It walks that tightrope really well, where it's this in a lesser hand, this would have been impossible to parse at all, but they make it work really well. And that could just be me. Somebody else could look at that book and go, what is going on here?
Yeah. Which is entirely, again, like when I say it's entirely subjective, It is, but when it comes to good design, there seems to be more of a universal acceptance of what works and what doesn't work. It's
Yeah,
when you get to the fine nuance of things that, like, well, that doesn't work for me. Oh, I like the colors. Well, you're wrong.
it's kind of the, there's always room for, wiggling, but there's generally things that you just should and shouldn't do. Like, you don't put light gray text on a white background. That's just not user friendly. But
No, I
if
would
you,
argue you don't want to put use a black background for text for the most part, because I find that can be hard to read too.
I mean, as somebody who keeps almost everything they have in dark mode, but
So the difference is, and I've come to this realization recently, I also keep almost everything in dark mode. However, when it comes to an actual physical book, it just seems weirdly harder to read if the colors aren't right. Whereas
yeah,
in dark mode, you've got the screen provides its own lights that you can see from.
yeah. So it has that built-in contrast that you
Exactly, that you
can
can
work with.
play with and adjust. Yeah.
Now, having said that, you'll rarely see all black pages in physical stuff just because that's a lot of ink and ink is
Yeah.
expensive.
Well, that's just it too. Not only is it for me a poor design choice, it's also a poor financial choice if your entire book is in black ink.
Yeah, and that is very much like, great example, Morkborg has a lot of, like, black pages with, like, colored graphics in text displayed on top of them, because it's designed to be visually engaging. But most RPGs tend to use a fairly standard, white page, 2-column layout, maybe some griblets around the edges, and, strategically placed art pieces.
Yeah.
That's the general consensus on what they've settled on. And there was a while there, especially early on, when people were still trying to figure out how it all worked, where you would have, like, just solid paragraph text running all the way across, or you'd have, I saw a couple that were 3-column layouts, which was nonsense. But yeah, it's an interesting field.
Yeah, I think it's funny when it really comes down to it, it's the keep it simple is a great mindset to keep following when it comes to anything like that, because ultimately it's one of those things where if you don't keep it simple, it can get way too confusing.
Like, ultimately, the primary goal of the book needs to be, how easy is this to use at the table?
Yeah.
Because I have definitely played games where the usability of the book has suffered because the design was more on providing, like, I'm going to sit down on my couch and, like, read through the book. You got to design primarily at the table, but reading at the couch is a good secondary or tertiary motivation, because for someone like me and a lot of other people, you don't get the chance to play most of them. You will be sitting there reading them
And
on the couch.
and honestly, I feel that reading on the couch is important, because if you're the GM, you're not gonna, oh, I need to learn all of this at the table. You're gonna do the pre-work to have an idea as to what's going on, how systems work, what you can and can't get away with,
Yeah.
what happens if you've got someone trying to take advantage of something in the system, etc.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that, getting into back to favorite systems. I think some of my favorites are actually the ones where that require very little pre-reading, but you can sit down and dig into to enjoy. Like Savage Worlds. You've never played Savage Worlds, I
I
don't
have
think.
never played Savage Worlds, not that
No.
I'm aware of.
Savage Worlds is a very simple game to teach and learn. And once you actually get into it, especially from the GM side, once you kind of internalized how the game works, it's really easy to just make up and adjust stuff on the fly. So, like, the books are there, and you can, if you want to, like, sit down and read through them and parse out the various optional rules and stuff that are in them. But there's only, I think, maybe 20 pages that you actually need to sit down and read to get the core rules of before you can start playing.
So it would be more like, to borrow a popular phrase, more like guidelines than rules.
Exactly. Savage Worlds is definitely one of my favorites, just because it's a generic system, which it's obviously it does a specific style of play, but it's not beholden to a specific genre. Like Savage Worlds is a framework that you can play a sci-fi or a western or a fantasy game using. It's deliberately made that you can tweak and twist it as necessary to play those different genres. It definitely has a certain style, like it's very like pulp action style of game, like that's what the rules encourage you to play like. But you can play that in any type of genre as opposed to something like, and people will argue with me on this one, but D&D is very fantasy coded. If you wanted to play sci-fi with D&D, you can. People have done it. People have taken the base system and made full sci-fi RPGs out of it. But the unaltered D&D 5th edition rules would be absolutely terrible to use for sci-fi. While something like Savage Worlds, it has like, hey, here's in the example equipment lists, it has, hey, here's like old style weapons, modern style weapons, and futuristic weapons. And it's more of a toolbox where you can grab in the different pieces that you want and assemble them together to make the game at the table. And the utmost example of that would be, I'm guessing you probably haven't heard of this one. Have you heard of GURPS before?
Yes.
Huh.
Only because you were talking about it with one of the guys in the group chat, and I'm like, I have no idea what this means.
Okay, so GURPS is one of the older RPGs. I'm not going to say it's the first generic RPG, but it's the first one that I've had exposure to. And it literally stands for Generic Universal Role-Playing Game.
That
System.
makes sense. Yep.
Yeah, and it is a rules-dense, massively crunchy toolbox that has had PDFs that cover kind of like how saying Shadow the Demon Lord does it. It has it'll have like a PDF that covers dragons, but while the Shadow the Demon Lord one is like, hey, here's 5 pages with a little bit of lore and some stats, the GURPS one is like a freaking tome that will get into, different styles of dragons in mythology and like how you can use dragons at your game and what their like ecology might be and like all of these things around incorporating dragons into your game.
I feel like that is probably because of the nature of the setting, is that because it's so universal, they almost want to make sure that you understand the differences between a European dragon and a Japanese dragon or Chinese dragon and things like that.
Yeah, and like it is, they are both like it's GURPS is a game that I absolutely love. I've only played it once, and I don't think it'll really get much more play than that because, like I said, it is a very, very well. I shouldn't say it's very crunchy. At the table, it's really simple to play, but it's the before you get to the table part that can get insanely complicated because it is like Savage Worlds is a system, like it's a full rule set that has some additional rules and stuff that you can add on and tweak if you want to. GURPS is just, hey, here's a box full of tools, build your game.
I feel like the difference between Savage Worlds and GURPS is that Savage World is a Lego kit with instructions and only the pieces you need to build the TIE fighter. Whereas GURPS is the Lego factory. It's like, have fun, go build something.
Yeah, and then, the expansion books are, hey, here's a new set that you can add on to your pre-existing set, or, hey, we opened a new factory, here you go. And
yeah.
if you can take the time as the GM to like sit down and go through all those and go, okay, like here is the options that I want the players to have access to. Here are the various rules that I want us to use. You can build like exactly the type of game you want to play. You can dial up or down the complexity as much as you want. You can focus on different things. Like GURPS is an amazing toolbox but because of the nature of it being a toolbox, especially if you're getting into it for the first time, it can be a lot of work. And I can't remember
I th-
exactly, just a couple of years ago, they actually released their own box set, GURPS Fantasy, which was kind of, a pre-assembled toolkit for you for, hey, I want to get into GURPS, but I don't want to, you know, try to go into the factory and learn how to use the factory. It's like, hey, here is a bunch of presets that you can use. Once you played it, you can keep playing in this, or if you want, or you can, pop open the engine bonnet and start tinkering around.
I think the fact that they understood they had to release a module with training wheels, so to speak, goes to show just how aware they are of how complex the system is in general.
Well, it's a kind of a joke. I think in specifically for GURPS, I think it was, I want to say GURPS third edition, they released a GURPS vehicles, which was ridiculously detailed in the rules for it, because it wasn't just like, hey, you want a car, here's a template for your car. It was like, hey, you want a car, okay, decide how big the car is, and then here's the formula for developing the weight and all of that. And it was absolute nonsense. It was glorious, but it was absolute nonsense and near useless at the table from my perspective.
Yeah, that sounds kind of not excessive. Like, I love the fact that they give you that much flexibility and options. However, at the same time, I can see it being way too much for the majority of players.
Oh, it is excessive, but it is gloriously excessive. It's kind of like that joke about, GURPS is like the RPG for programmers,
Right.
because it's ridiculously detailed as much as you want. But then, like, when you get to the actual table, and like once you have your character creation done, you're actually sitting down at the table. The vast majority of the time, if a player wants to do something, it's like, okay, roll 3d6 and try to roll under this number.
Yeah, which is easy enough. It's just getting to that point can be overwhelming.
Yeah, which is like, if the one game that I ran in the system, and at some point I would like to try again because I am a sucker for it. But like the one time we played, it was like, hey, getting to the table took a couple of sessions of, all right, we're going to sit down, we're going to go through the character creation together because we're all kind of learning this, like figuring out, okay, this makes sense, that makes sense, da 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 da. Okay, we've got that, figured it out. Okay, now we're at the table. Cool. 3d6, let's go. But
Yeah,
getting there
once you
was,
get to that point, it's fine, but you've got to get to that point.
because it's a reoccurring problem in the hobby as a whole, that it's really hard to get into RPGs if you don't have somebody who already knows it to like bring you in and teach you the ropes. Like once you know how to run and play in GURPS, it's not that complicated. But the floor for playing, especially for somebody who's never played an RPG before, feels insanely high if you don't have, somebody who's already mastered it to drop down a ladder to get you up there.
Yeah, that makes sense. I was trying to think of some kind of mountaineering metaphor or simile or whatever you want to call it, and I can't, so I'm not going to. I also don't mountaineer, folks. For those of you who were curious and thought that was a new thing about you've discovered about me, I don't rock climb. I don't cave. I fully intend to never cave.
Oh,
Again,
spelunking terrifies me.
I've done it once, and it was really, really interesting. However, I did it when I was in grade 7 or 8, and it was great fun. It was a guided tour. The guy doing it was a professionally trained caver and knew how to take us through. And he said several times, stay way over to the left because down to the right is a hole, and if you go down there, it's a lot harder to get you back out. He's like, I could get you out, but it won't be fun and it will take hours. I'm like,
Yeah.
okay. So we obviously listened to him.
Yeah,
I would
not
never
terrifying
go.
or anything.
Yeah, no, I would never go caving without a guide or anything like that. I've gone on tours of caves underground, and they're
Nice.
fantastic, but it's very much here's a man-made path. Here's here's a man-made tunnel that you can go through at the end because we had to widen out what was otherwise a crawl space.
Yeah.
So those are fun.
Somebody has already done the dangerous part for you.
Exactly. Like underground fascinates me. I will. It is very unlikely I will ever willingly go underground on my own to explore a cave. I've watched far too many videos about what happens when people get stuck.
Ooh, yep. And like,
Yeah.
hey, I'll play a character who's all for that kind of stuff, but
And-
me doing it myself, no.
And that, folks, is why RPGs are fun, because you can play doing something that you would never do yourself. I was going to say like murder, but people actually do that. So.
I mean, people go splunking, and
well, that is a safer analogy. On that note, folks, thank you for staying with us. We appreciate your patience with the tangents. I hope that the audio issues we had either make you laugh or you don't notice them.
Maybe at some point we'll come back and actually finish this topic properly, because I think this was 90% tangent and 10% topic.
I honestly, based on the notes I have, I actually think it went well. I just think if we planned it, it might have gone a bit better.
People are gonna love it or they hate it. As long as we keep making it, I'll be happy.
Exactly. We'll be back. I think it's 2 weeks. I think this is a bi-weekly release schedule, so we'll be back. And till that time,
game on.
Hey, thanks for watching the previous video from Graphic Policy Television. Just by watching, you help support our site. Thank you so much. Now, if you're watching these videos, you probably care about geeky things like movies, television, comic books, toys, games, video games, you name it. You can go and subscribe right now to our YouTube channel to stay in touch and catch all the new videos, or check out our website at graphicpolicy.com. There's a nice link on this end of the video. But as always, thank you for watching. Keep on rocking and keep it geeky.